Hey, welcome to another episode of Tell Me How You're Mighty, real talk about cheating. It's Tracy, Chump Lady here, with Sarah. And today, Sarah, what are we talking about? We're talking about getting pregnant. So,
Yes, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because of course, I think this highlights more than anything that affairs are not just a little bit of fun. They're things that have lifetime repercussions.
yes, we're talking about multi-generational trauma. Like, it's maybe you're the product of an affair. We heard from people who found that out after interesting DNA surprises with ancestry tests. And yeah, we got a lot of responses. And I couldn't, there were so many, I always feel bad for everybody I left out, but I tried to like highlight different stories that kind of go over it. And I think I know your chump story pretty well, Sarah. I actually had like a, like the double life had other children I was unaware of, but I didn't find that out till afterwards. So,
I just think it's staggering. I mean, unfortunately, my ex, I had four children, but he had a vasectomy, so there was none of that. Although I did discover, he did say that they had been Googling for vasectomy reversal, so they were plotting other children, but it never actually happened.
God.
But I think it introduces a whole new level of complexity. You are expected to possibly introduce your children. You've got to explain to your children. It's something that they're going to have to go live with for the rest of their life, and
Right.
some establish very good bonds, but others it's almost impossible to comprehend, particularly if that child is was either born at the same time as you or is about 20 years younger. There are all sorts of complexities here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and when people talk about affairs, oh, it's just a private thing between, two people. They never look at these wider circles of hurt. You're asking, first of all, for anybody who's the product of an affair, it's obviously not your fault. This poor innocent kid, like the person you were on that panel with, I felt so bad for her. I mean, like her very existence, she's carrying this burden that's so unfair. Her very existence, if it was known who her father is, would give pain to a group of people. And like her, how terrible to feel that way. And yet you understand it too from the chump perspective. And yeah, I mean, it's just awful. And also, I mean, a lot of these, we have the stories on both sides, either women trying to pass off paternity to unwitting chump men, or, you know, conversely, guys just spreading their seed, not using birth control. And they really don't care. They don't care about the children they make. They don't care about the children they have. And it's just all part of this big, weird pick-me dance for their ego. It's
It's
really
interesting, isn't it? Because
appalling.
the panelists that who was the child of an affair, and then went on to try and track down her father and forge a relationship with him. She, in the end, realized that he was a very weak character and that he was someone that wasn't worth having a relationship with because he was as useless with her as he'd been with his first children and his first
Yeah.
wife.
I mean, how painful for everybody. Yeah. The fuckwits, they're not worth it. Well, shall we jump right into our
Yeah,
first
let's go
fuckwit
straight in.
story? This one's from Lynn, and she left us a message.
Hi, Tracy. My now ex-husband got someone pregnant while I was pregnant. I miscarried, and I think he had started that affair then. And then we got pregnant again, and then 4 months later, he got her pregnant. 2 years later, he told me about it. So the kids were both like a year and a half, and we were moving to St. Louis, where she lived, from Texas. And that was hard. I had given him a chance. I said, that's your one chance. This can't ever happen again. I had suggested he terminate his parental rights because he was a doctor, is a doctor. And I didn't want them coming after money. So he did do that. And I don't know what, she had been married, so I'm assuming that he just thought it was his. I don't know whatever came of that. They are now divorced, of course. And now I figured out 2 years ago that he has been cheating on me the whole time, before that time and after that time, which I didn't realize. And so now that was his second chance, and I kicked him out. Thanks for your work.
Ugh. You know, I have an absolute front bench in hell for people who cheat on people who are pregnant because it's such a vulnerable time in your life. So then to have D-days and do that timeline where, you know, you figure out that, oh my God, when we were trying to get pregnant, you got somebody else pregnant. I mean, it's just, it's next level. It's
And again,
horrible.
it goes against that sort of idea that sometimes you hear from relationship experts who say, right, come on, let's have a look. What were you doing? Where was the communication? And you think,
Right.
actually, what was wrong with somebody that they actively with their partner, their wife, try to get pregnant while they're carrying around cheating on them with somebody else? You know, that is a
Yeah.
whole new level of really narcissistic and odd behavior.
Yeah, and according to what she says is that she has a miscarriage. They're trying to get pregnant, and while she's grieving that loss of pregnancy, he's starting an affair and getting another woman pregnant, and then she gets pregnant. So I mean, like, what kind of magnificent person does he feel like? You know, like I'm knocking up all these women, and he's a doctor. I mean, like, so he knows how babies are made. You know, like,
Yeah. I mean, I don't. Some of these sort of speak for themselves. You can't really come back with anything that would add to the story itself, and how staggeringly badly people are prepared to behave.
yeah, but to Lynn's credit, she kicked him out. So well done, Lynn. You kicked him out, and you're a young mother. Kudos. That took a lot of guts and strength, you know. All right, our next one is from the guy's perspective, and this is a pretty awful story too.
Looking forward to Tuesday writes, my ex-wife is the product of her late father's affair. He coerced his wife, my mother-in-law, who was then pregnant with my sister-in-law, into adopting her after she was born. He never showed an ounce of contrition for what he did, and would go berserk if anyone dared highlight the contradiction between his fine, upstanding member of society public persona and his private actions. Between his fine, upstanding member of society public persona and his private actions. I don't judge my ex-mother-in-law for not kicking him to the curb when she found out, as I know how difficult it would have been for her to divorce him to gain a fair settlement in the late 1960s. The fact that he went so far as to threaten to destroy her career and take away the child she was carrying if she tried shows just what he was like. Sadly, for the kids and I, it turned out that my ex-wife was very much like her father, both in terms of her propensity for cheating and her behavior when she got found out. The damage caused by cheating all too easily spans multiple generations.
Oh, this is what you were talking about before, you know, how people, multi-generational cheaters here. So her dad's a cheater. She's the product of an affair, the sex wife. And then she goes on to chump her own husband. It's just,
I find this quite shocking though, because I always think if people have lived through the pain that affairs can cause, your response would not be to repeat it and take it on to the next generation, but to try and live a different and a better life. But it you know, sometimes you do see, you know, one of my big worries is you know, you sort of look at your children and think, right, their father had an affair. Are you more likely to do it? Because you do see this pattern repeating itself.
yeah, right. You know, but I think, I mean, I think what was interesting about this story is, in the case of these former in-laws, is that the chumped mother-in-law doesn't leave. But of course, it's the 1960s. Where's she going to go? How could she support herself? And she has this vengeful husband. You know, so this shit gets modeled to these kids, and I think when it gets modeled to you, you have much greater propensity to relive it in your own life. And who has the power? The cheater has the power. The chump has to eat the shit sandwich. I mean, and I mean, to be in a lifelong pick-me dance with the affair partner and the half siblings, and I mean, it's just to think of the generations of women, and it's still out there, of course, who are stuck in these cycles. It's terrible. I mean, it's just tragic.
And families are complicated enough as it is, but when you've got this level of complication coming into proceedings as well, it's almost impossible to navigate it properly, isn't it? I mean, how do you deal with it all?
Well, I don't know. In this day and age, you deal with it with a divorce summons and having jobs and support and that's why it's so I feel like it's a whole other level and we can't go into it in just one podcast, but I really when I hear these stories, my first thought is, oh my God, please have a job and education and some way of supporting yourself. And so much of what keeps people stuck is systemic. And you look at the generations in which there were so few choices for women, mostly. Um, it just shows that we have to think about this with a bigger lens. Just yeah. Anyway, that's all I'll say about it before I go into one of my feminist rants.
Well, I'll tell you what, the next story is absolutely shocking as well. This is Slow But Sure. Let's hear this one.
Slow But Sure writes, the other woman got pregnant when my oldest was 6 months old after I had experienced 5 miscarriages. I had been with Fuckwit for 11 years. Then, since I was 18. The last miscarriage being born alive at 26.5 weeks and living for a week. I pick-me-danced my way along and realized I was pregnant again when I had finally had enough of the affair continuing. He never told the other woman I was pregnant. In fact, she found out the day of my delivery when her friend, who's a nurse at the facility, saw Fuckwit there and had come into my room to confirm. Fuckwit had to beat the friend to the news, as I later found out from the other woman herself, when she was hurt. 4 years later, Fuckwit came to me yesterday to tell me he's finally fallen in love with her. Fuckwit treats my kids poorly, skips their birthdays and dedications simply because his family has stood firmly behind me. He goes all out for the other woman's son, whose paternity he never confirmed. He just said if he finds it isn't his, he'll just step up and be his dad anyway. He added that he needs me to show the other woman some grace and not make her life difficult. They are finally together now. But here he was at my apartment at 10 p.m. the same day yesterday. He wanted sex with me. The nerve.
Yeah, the other woman got pregnant. Oh God, 5 miscarriages. It's just, I mean, that level of grief, you know.
And losing a baby at 26 and a half
Oh
weeks and going
God.
through that awful upset and actually being with someone that you trust so implicitly, when you've been with someone since you were 18, since you were little more than a child yourself, and you trust them and you go through this, and then they behave in this fashion.
Yeah. And I love how, okay, this poor woman, this poor chump woman who goes on to have children, but first goes through these miscarriages and all this. When she's finally pregnant, she has to tread around the other woman having hurt feelings about it. I mean, oh my God, the temerity of that mistress to say, well, I found out you were pregnant and I'm so hurt. Like,
I think that the advantage of hearing these stories as well is so many people, when they're in the midst of this, they think it's just me. This
yeah,
no one else goes through anything like this. But we've heard these stories over and over again of just how low people can sink
right.
and how badly they can behave. And no sitting down in front of a relationship counselor is going to change that behavior. If they're prepared to behave like this, then, there's not much that can be done to redeem this relationship.
Right. No, I agree. Well, and to your point, there's not much to be done to redeem it. I love how this story ends where he goes off to be with the other woman. But then as of like this week, he's propositioning her for sex. So they don't change. He hasn't changed. I'm not saying they can't ever change, but this guy did not change. The other woman did not win a prize. So, okay. Our next one, again, about what happens to the kids.
Velvet Hammer writes, my daughter wants to take a 23andMe test. Knowing what we do about traitor X/dad, there could very well be other children out there, giving 23andMe a whole new meaning. My greatest sympathy is for all the children that get caught in the infidelity crossfire. It's the most difficult and cruel loyalty issue that they are saddled with and forced to navigate.
So 23andMe, this is one of these things where the surprises come out, right? Your kid could take an ancestry test and find half siblings. I mean, your fuckwit might think that the secret dies with them, or, no one will ever find out. But we live in a brave new world of DNA testing, and multi-generational secrets come out. It's, fathers aren't really your father, and this poor kid's gonna find, other siblings. And then how do you navigate that? It's, I have a lot of sympathy for people who don't know their ancestry. I think that's a really hard
And
one.
this must become more common now as people are now able to do DNA testing and try and trace their ancestry. And a lot of people, you hear these stories where they've had the biggest shock as a result of doing that, and then they've exposed layers and layers of lives that are
Yeah.
part of their lives. Often, later on when they've thought that they had this wonderful, joyful nuclear family, and it turns out to be very different.
I I had a story like this in my own family. It's not infidelity related, but this is several years ago. I got contacted on Ancestry from a woman said, "Hey, you're my nearest genetic relative. Can you tell me how we're related?" And because both my parents had a DNA test, I knew we were related through my mother's side. Long story short, this woman was adopted. She had no idea who her birth parents were. And it was a 50-year-old secret that it was a woman in my family, a very tight family. Like everybody knows everybody. We thought it had to be a guy, right? Because we couldn't imagine that a woman could conceal a pregnancy. But that's what it was in the 60s before Roe v. Wade. And that was the era of forced adoptions. And if you were an unwed single mother and you got pregnant, they took away your baby and made the problem go away. And that's what happened. That's a whole other story. But yeah, I mean, and this poor woman who's my cousin, Corrine, she had to like go essentially approach strangers and go, "Hey, can you tell me how we're related?" And it opened these old wounds. It had a beautiful ending. She met her birth mother and everything's cool now, but it was hard for everybody, all because of the stupid fucking stigma against.
Yeah, it's staggering, isn't it? Now, we have more, don't we?
Oh yeah, they go on and on here.
Kokichi writes, "My Jesus cheater has 2 children with his affair partner. Our kids are 21 and 19. The affair partner is 31. Jesus cheater and affair partner's kids are 7 and 5 years old. Jesus cheater has been shocked that our children want nothing to do with him. I feel like it adds an additional layer of discard as well. Not only did Jesus cheater need to replace me, he needed to replace all of us. He is currently rewriting history about how I knew all along that I was a miserable person to be married to, and that he didn't meet her until 2016. But I have wire transfers that he sent her in 2014. It is all so sick and twisted. After I confronted him, he acted like we were all going to become some kind of weird blended family, and he was shocked that I didn't want to remain in his sick harem. Our 2-day trial was described as salacious by my family lawyer."
Okay. Oh, Jesus cheaters. You gotta love the Jesus cheaters. Here's a guy who's like upstanding pillar of the community and has two other children with his mistress. You know, good Lord. And then he claims the timeline is different, but she can show that he was paying child support. I mean, you can't, when you have actual children, like who are ages, your lies are only going to go so far. I don't know who they are. I don't know when they were born, you know.
And what's raised in that is that extra sort of insult, not just replacing one member of your family, replace the lot of them. Get
Right.
yourself a new wife, new kids, new lot. See if you can upgrade your family experience.
Well, it just goes to show how shallow these attachments these people are. It's just you're all fungible. We can just swap one out for the next, and whatever. I got new and shiny. I don't need my old children. you know, the new baby smell. It's off. Got to make some new babies. Just awful.
Now, this next one is about someone that was potentially going through the menopause, but very different, actually, what was going on. Let's hear this one.
Bruno writes, my ex-wife had been a hot mess for over a year. She was emotionally erratic, constantly bickering, complaining about people at work, and drinking too much. She was also seeing a therapist, psychiatrist, and on several medications. She was 46, so I was thinking menopause, but she didn't want to talk about it. Out of the blue, she tells me we have an overnight date at a swanky downtown hotel. We get all dressed up for a fancy dinner and have enthusiastic sex, followed by room service breakfast in bed. Then she tells me she's pregnant. Gulp. Not expecting that, but I tell her we can do this because my parents had a late oops baby too. Unfortunately, she lost the baby a few days later. Then she went back to being erratic and engaging in demeaning comments and behavior. After maybe a year, she says she wants a divorce, and shortly I discover she had been having sex with at least 2 co-workers. I did some embarrassing pick-me dancing, and she created some ugly scenes, but we finally divorced after a year and a half. Later, I found some notes in a box of clothes she left behind that told me she had been having sex with a dark-skinned, brown-eyed co-worker, and it struck me. She had been worried that baby was his. It would have been obvious, as we are both blue-eyed. She had created quite a mess and must have been torn between losing a baby and not being exposed as a cheater in a humiliating way. Because I loved her at the time, I still feel compassion for her. But she made her own bed.
Yeah. This guy, like, he escaped. I mean, it must have been horrific to go through, but it sounds like she wanted to pass the paternity off on him and then realized she couldn't because one of her affair partners was of a different race, and it would have been hard to explain that, the genetics of that, and then she lost the pregnancy or terminated it. I don't know, but oh God, I mean, this poor guy, you can feel the roller coaster he's on. I mean, he's trying to be supportive and be like, hey, these things happen, and okay, I'll become a parent again in my late 40s. And um, and what's his big heart rewarded with is just deception, and then, and a pick me dancing, and then it ends.
And it also shows a staggering level of empathy that his ex was not able to display, that he says, I still feel compassion.
Yeah.
She made her own bed, but he still feels compassion for her despite the appalling treatment.
Yeah. Well, chumps are good people. You're a good guy, Bruno. I hope you've gone on to much better things and better people. All right, our next one, recovering opium addict.
Recovering opium addict writes, the final unwitting other woman got pregnant. According to the letter he wrote to me after the truth surfaced, he was happy because it meant finally he could stop living 2 lives. But then they decided to have an abortion because, in her words, she knew something was wrong with their relationship, but she didn't know what. So he had to continue the charade for another 4 months, until she turned up on my doorstep. He's also a Jesus cheater. I'm all about someone's right to choose. This is not such a big issue in New Zealand, but I secretly hope that one still burns his conscience, especially when he's polishing that perfect Christian image. Sorry, this one's a little triggering for me. We had 6 years of infertility before having our 2 sons, and affair number 1 started while I was pregnant with the youngest.
Another Jesus cheater. This is like a plague with the Jesus cheaters and the children out of wedlock. So he got the final. There were others, other women pregnant, and he was happy, right? Because he could finally stop living 2 lives. But I mean, he'd been living multiple lives for a while. Oh God.
And also, that it just highlights again that, people have, if you're engaged in this family life and you know what it is to go through bringing children into the world, and then you just choose to disregard it so easily. I mean, it is astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm very pro women's reproductive rights and abortion as healthcare, and we won't go down that sticky wicket for this one. But this guy is, pretending to be a Jesus cheater, and she says, I hope he lives with the hypocrisy of this. But I think that's the way it is for a lot of these guys. They think that that's your moral decision to make, whether or not you terminate a pregnancy. As if their sperm, is completely innocent. They didn't ejaculate irresponsibly. You got pregnant. You need to do something about that baby you made, other woman. Again, it's a terrible look into the mindset of these people. Like, ugh, all right. Our next one's a bit tawdry. What do you think about this one?
It's very tawdry. Yeah, it is very tawdry.
Nemesis writes, my fuckwit married a massage parlor sex worker as soon as the ink was dry on our divorce. They are still married, and she is still practicing her profession. Guess she quickly found out fuckwit isn't the wealthy man she thought he was when the money ran out from the retirement account he liquidated without my knowledge. I hope he's worried every single day about how many happy endings and BJs she's giving. The woman's teenage son is likely his child. The time frame matches when he suddenly announced he was getting a vasectomy. I had been on birth control for years and asked him to get a vasectomy so I could stop taking them. He vehemently refused, saying he'd never let a doctor get anywhere near his junk with a knife. He said he changed his mind and was doing it for me, so I didn't have to take birth control anymore. Chumpy me, I thought it was odd, but was happy he was finally putting my well-being above his own. He has not admitted to anyone that he is the kid's father, but everyone on his side of the family believes he is. From what I hear, fuckwit is not happy. The wife moved her mother in with them, and he hates that they all speak Chinese around him. He thinks they are all talking shit about him. They probably are. I saw a recent picture of him, and I didn't even recognize him. He's puffy and looks like he's aged 20 years, not just the 5 it's been since he left. I don't know if I'd recognize him if I passed him on the street. I'm mostly at meh now, thank goodness. So glad he's no longer in my life. He truly is one sick puppy.
To marry the massage parlor sex worker. Now, there's a pick-me dance that guy just signed up for. I mean, I don't feel super sorry for the fuckwit. He chose this, but yeah, he had a kid with the massage parlor sex worker, and now he has to live together as a family unit with them.
And now they're all faced with the consequences because she discovers that actually he's not quite what he said he was, and now they're all living in joyful disharmony.
Right. And and she's happy that this is no longer her experience, but oh my God. It's I think that underscores another thing, and I don't know what some of the people who wrote into us, but one of the themes that came up a lot was that these fuckwits get into these incredibly complicated family situations. They have their double lives and their other families and stuff. And then they expect the chumps and the chump kids to just all be one big blended Brady Bunch family. Like it's all really cool and copacetic and I love you, you love me, everybody loves me, we're all cool, right? And nobody's allowed to have hurt feelings or ambivalence or even indifference. I mean, you could choose, hey, you know what? Shared DNA is overrated, and I really don't want to know this other family you have. I just, the whole pressure that these people put people under to have a harem, and an expanded family. Ugh, more entitlement.
Well, I think that was a real insight into some of the goings on in these dysfunctional antics. And again, every one of these stories we hear, it highlights that the best thing to do is remove yourself as quickly as possible because there is no therapy. There is nothing that can be done to make this better. Yeah.
And your children, get your children there, out too. You can have the therapy. They can have the therapy. But the fuckwits, they can just, pay child support for the people they bring into the world. I'm a dreamer. I believe in child support, whether it happens or not. That wraps another episode of Tell Me How You're Mighty. You want to leave us a mighty story or a fuckwit of the week submission? Check out our new website, tellmehowyourmighty.com. That's yours spelled Youre. We've got all the episodes, show notes, links to our guests, and you can see the tea room where Sarah and I first met. If you enjoyed this episode, please review the podcast and follow us. Thanks. See you next week.